it is finally time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Nintendo Switch 2 and compare it against the Nintendo Switch OLED and see which particular gaming console is the better one for you. Now, there's some really big things to kind of keep in mind here. In my personal opinion, when you're taking a look at something like a Nintendo Switch 2 or the Nintendo Switch OLED, these two devices are very, very interesting to say the least, because there are some differences for the most part. Clearly, the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be the one that's going to make a lot more sense to recommend to people. That one is pretty much the future, but I'm still going to be honest with you. I think the Nintendo Switch OLED is still very good for the most part. I really do think the OLED Switch, if you've never owned a Nintendo Switch before, this is still the console to get. I think it's very good. I think it still has a lot of capability, and there are some advantages for a Nintendo Switch OLED than Nintendo Switch 2. So we'll take a look at this throughout this whole entire video, but if at any point you want to buy a Nintendo Switch, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both of them, the Nintendo Switch OLED model is basically on the front, giving you a 7-inch 720p OLED display. It's 60 Hz, and it is a pretty good looking panel for the most part. I would say coming from the original Nintendo Switch, this type of panel is still very good, and it still is very sharp. It's not the biggest panel of all time, especially for like a portable gaming console, but compared to the previous generations, I do think this was a really good looking console for the most part. The OLED display still looks very good, and anytime I go through and pick up this type of console, I still feel like it's still giving me a really good experience, right? It doesn't have the most amount of bezel on it, which is nice, and I do think this type of gaming console for the most part does a really good job at kind of just giving me exactly what I need. A beautiful display, very good, decent build quality for the most part. It's not the best, but still it's a very good, beautiful type of console. The Nintendo Switch 2 on the front, it's a little tiny bit different here. With this particular console, it's essentially going to be giving you a 7.9-inch 1080p LCD panel. So this one has the ability of going up to 120 Hz, which is massive. Getting 120 Hz is just such an amazing thing, and that in and of itself is definitely going to make this type of panel, I guess, more future-proof for the most part. It's also a bigger display as well, so that's another really big advantage. It's also 1080p, so I do think it's actually a pretty good upgrade coming from the OLED Switch. But it kind of comes down to the competition where it's like, well, one is an LCD panel and one is an OLED. Which one might be better? I would probably say the Switch 2 is probably going to be the better one here, even though it has an LCD panel. But when I look at my Switch 2 and I look at my OLED Switch, I do think my Switch 2 with that 120 Hz display and with it being faster and stuff, it just makes me feel like I'm having a faster console and a nicer display, even though I do kind of miss having an OLED display on my Nintendo Switch OLED. Now, when you look at the bodies, there's a lot of differences. The OLED Switch was this tried and true type of design. It basically looks kind of what you'd expect. I think everyone's kind of used to this by now. You had the Joy-Con controllers, which looked and feel okay. These things were never the best things going on for the Nintendo Switches. They were prone to failure, and I did like kind of connecting them though. I never felt like they were going to break off or they weren't, good in that standpoint. I've always felt like it was pretty decent. But now with the Switch 2, these ones you take off by clicking a little button on the back and they kind of click out. So I do think from that standpoint, it kind of gives me a little bit of a better impression. Like I feel like that makes this console feel a little bit more premium. But with the OLED Switch, it's a slightly different type of experience because it feels more cheap now compared to my Nintendo Switch 2. Because it's more magnetized, but I feel like my Switch 2 has a higher chance of breaking, but I don't feel like it's that big of a deal either, but I guess we're going to have to see when we start traveling with these things. On top of that, the Nintendo Switch 2 has 2 USB-C ports, where the Nintendo Switch OLED one has 1. I do think this is a nice thing for different accessories coming out in the future, but I would probably tell you for the most part, I don't really know, I feel like with the OLED Switch, having that type of dock situation, just plugging it in, I never really felt like I wanted more USB-C ports. But I do think it's really nice having the capability of either plugging in and charging up your console from the top or the bottom, plugging in accessories a different way. I do think there is a lot of capability Nintendo could throw into this type of port eventually. And it's just funny having a gaming console with multiple different USB Type-C ports. I think that's actually something that's really, really funny. On top of that, the layout, the quality, the device themselves, I mean, they both feel very, very good. I really do like how Nintendo improved and increased the internal storage of the Nintendo Switch 2. We now are going from a 64GB Nintendo Switch OLED internally to a Nintendo Switch 2 that has a 256GB internal storage. So that right there I think is a really nice thing to basically have. And I personally do feel like if you're about to go through and pick up a gaming console, having that much extra storage is actually a very nice thing to basically have. Again, it might not be the most impressive, most important thing of all time, but I do feel like if you're about to go through and like pick up a gaming console, already having that much storage built in can save you a lot down the line, and it gives you a lot more storage options. You can put way more games inside of a Nintendo Switch 2 than the OLED Switch. For a lot of people, you might not even have to go and expand your storage in that sense. So I do feel like from that standpoint, that's kind of another really cool thing to kind of think about within that gaming console as well. Now, beyond that, you do get a couple of things going on with the Nintendo Switch 2, which can be kind of concerning. Number one, it is the battery life. So with the battery life of the Nintendo Switch 2, it's rated to be giving you anywhere from 2 hours to 6.5 hours of playback, depending on your usage. So battery life, I guess, is not really going to be the strong suit of the Switch 2 from what I'm seeing. It's a more powerful console. It's going to be giving you more power. So because of that, it is going to be a little bit of a different type of situation than something like than the OLED Switch. The OLED Switch was slated to be giving you 4.5 to 9 hours of, gaming. So that right there is going to be another difference. With the Nintendo Switch OLED, you are kind of getting better battery life, but you're also getting a better display in some people's cases. So that could be another type of thing that kind of goes on here as well. On top of that, when you're looking at the price tag, $449 for the Nintendo Switch 2 is pretty expensive, right? It's a pretty expensive price tag. The OLED Switch is $350, and it's probably going to go even cheaper than that. In the used market, you can probably buy it for way cheaper than that. So already from that standpoint, you are basically getting another really cool thing going on for the OLED Switch from just having that type of capability in and of itself. So I do feel like from a price tag standpoint, display standpoint, battery life standpoint, the OLED Switch might be better, but in almost every single other area, the Nintendo Switch 2 is a way better console. You're also getting the capability of having a way faster console as well. The standard Switch, the OLED Switch, had the same internals as the original Switch, and that thing really wasn't that performance heavy. With the Switch 2, you get way more power with the NVIDIA Tegra T239 chipset with 12GB of RAM. That's amazing. Having that type of console with that type of power is seriously really awesome. You're also getting 4K at 60 Hz or 60 frames per second with it being docked inside of the Nintendo Switch 2. The OLED Switch was just 1080p, which again is probably okay for a lot of people, but going up to something like, the docked output of going up to 4K at 60 is something that is actually really nice, and I'm a massive fan of that when it comes down to it as well. So I will definitely tell you, in my personal opinion, I do think the Nintendo Switch 2 is the better console for the most part. Like if you're about to go through and pick up a Switch, the Switch 2 makes way more sense, right? Even though it is more expensive and the battery life might not be the best, it's still going to be giving you an overall better experience, mostly because that type of console is just a better type of experience, right? It's more expensive, it's newer, it's going to last way longer, and there's way more features inside of the Switch 2 than the OLED Switch. But I do think if you have never owned a Switch before, getting an OLED Switch is still a very good option. I feel like this type of gaming console is very good, and if you're about to go through and pick up a console, this one does make a lot of sense to go and buy as well. If you've never picked up a Switch, if you've never owned one before, there are tons and tons of amazing quality games that are available for the Nintendo Switch OLED that I highly would recommend picking up without a doubt. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.